My coworker couldn't save a homeless man from freezing to death, so she started rescuing others by bringing them home. When I visited her house, she introduced me to Bill, who'd been dead for 3 weeks, but she'd been feeding him soup and tucking him into bed every night. I was in the middle of finishing up homeless shelter forms when my coworker Megan called me and said, Bill just froze to death because I couldn't house him in time. When I got to Oak Street, I found her fighting with the paramedics, begging them to let her have a few more minutes to say goodbye. At first, I thought she was just going through the 5 stages of grief, but I never noticed when she started buying extra sleeping bags and keeping them in her car. Just in case I see someone who needs one, Megan explained when I helped her load them one morning. And when Megan told me she'd invited 3 homeless people to stay in her house during the next storm, I even felt proud of her. Just for a few nights, she said, her eyes bright with purpose. I have the space. Something in her voice made me uneasy, but I pushed it down. She was doing something good. The first real warning sign came 3 weeks later. Megan had been missing work to care for her sick guests. When I brought over soup, the house felt wrong. The curtains were all drawn and it smelled like eucalyptus and something else I couldn't make out. Come meet everyone, Megan said excitedly, leading me to the living room where 3 people were sleeping on her furniture. She knelt beside a young man in an army jacket and stroked his hair. Bill's been sleeping so well since he came home. My blood went cold. Megan, what the F did you just say? I know, she beamed at me. I couldn't believe it either. I was at the park last Tuesday and he recognized me right away. Megan, Bill is dead. We saw his body. We went to his memorial. She shook her head, still smiling. That's what I thought too. But look, she lifted the man's limp hand. Same scar on his thumb from when he told us about cutting it on a can. The angels brought him back to me so I could save him this time. The man's breathing was shallow. His skin had a grayish tint. Behind her, I could hear her talking to someone, but no one responded. She looked exhausted, but there was this manic gleam in her eyes that scared me. I tried to tell my boss about it, hoping she'd help to discourage Megan, but instead, she just responded saying, is she breaking any laws? Exactly. Just leave it alone. We can't punish someone for housing the homeless. I stared at that text for an hour, trying to convince myself everything was okay. After that, I never saw Megan again, until a week later, that is, because that's when she called me at 2 a.m. And before I could say anything, she blurted, I need your advice. Her voice was strangely calm. I had to sew Bill's mouth shut. She was chewing too loudly and disturbing the others. My whole body went cold. Megan, what did you just say? She sighed like I was being difficult. I know it sounds extreme, but he wouldn't stop making those wet sounds when I fed him. Now everyone can rest properly. Megan, where is Bill right now? There was a pause. In his chair, of course. He's been there all week. Such a good patient now. I told her I'd be right over, then immediately called 911. The officer who called me back sounded shaken. You're her emergency contact. We need you here. My legs felt like water as I got out of my car. When I arrived, I found Megan in the kitchen humming while she made tea. Through the doorway, I could see someone sitting very still on the couch. Too still. My blood turned to ice. Megan, love, what's happening here? I asked, voice shaking. You remember Bill? She said, gesturing to an elderly man propped up with pillows. He looked like he'd been dead for days. The room spun. This couldn't be real. I stumbled backward, but Megan kept talking in this dreamy voice. And Janet is doing so well with his meals now. In the kitchen, a young woman in the army jacket was seated at the table, a bowl of soup in front of him. Her head was tilted forward like she'd fallen asleep eating, but the smell told me she'd been gone at least as long as Bill. Megan reached over and wiped her chin with a napkin. He's finally keeping food down. The house was a nightmare. 2 more bodies were arranged in the spare bedroom, tucked into bed like children. Another man sat in a recliner with a book propped in his lap. 5 corpses total, all positioned like they were just resting. How had I let it get this far? When I ran outside to vomit, Megan followed me looking concerned. Are you not feeling well? I have some chamomile tea that might help. Even then, even in that moment of horror, she was trying to take care of me. When the police started removing bodies, Megan completely lost it. She threw herself over fake Bill, screaming, No, 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 you're waking them. They need their rest. They need to heal. When they continued, she turned on me with pure rage. You did this. You brought them here. They were finally safe, finally loved, finally home. The police had to physically restrain her while the paramedics sedated her. I watched my friend, my colleague, collapse into unconsciousness, still reaching for the bodies she believed were alive. I spent the next 3 hours in the parking lot, bent over a storm drain, my body rejecting everything while Detective Martinez kept asking the same question in different ways. His daughter was Megan's age, he mentioned twice, and I could see him trying to understand how someone could break this completely. Between heaves, I tried to explain about Bill's death, about the sleeping bags, about how grief had twisted into something monstrous, but every answer led to another question I couldn't face. How had I not seen this coming? How had I let it get this far? The drive home blurred into a nightmare of its own. Every bundle of blankets on the sidewalk made me slam the brakes. Every person sleeping in a doorway sent my heart racing. Were they breathing? Were they alive? I pulled over twice to check on people who turned out to be fine, just cold and confused by the crying woman shaking them awake. By the time I reached my driveway, my hands were trembling so badly I couldn't get the key in the ignition to turn off the car. My partner found me there at 4 a.m., still gripping the steering wheel, my clothes reeking of death and eucalyptus. They had to guide me inside like I was sleepwalking, peeling off my jacket while I stood there unable to form words. The smell wouldn't leave. It clung to my hair, my skin, seeming to seep deeper with every breath. Morning brought no relief. The local news had picked up the story, and suddenly Megan's face was everywhere. Angel of death social worker kept 5 bodies in home. The reporters had already crafted their narrative. My phone buzzed with the first voicemail before I could even process the headline. A stranger's voice, thick with rage, telling me I should have stopped her, that I was just as guilty. I deleted it, but 3 more came within the hour. My boss texted while I was still staring at the TV. Emergency meeting, 9 a.m., say nothing to media. A second message followed immediately. Delete all communications about this matter. I noticed her LinkedIn had already been updated, distancing the agency from Megan with clinical efficiency. Former employee, it now read, as if Megan hadn't been our top caseworker just yesterday. I stood in the shower for 40 minutes, scrubbing until my skin burned, but the smell persisted, maybe more in my mind than reality. I used an entire bottle of body wash, watching the suds swirl down the drain, wondering if I'd ever feel clean again. My partner knocked twice to check on me, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. The agency conference room felt like a tribunal. My boss sat at the head of the table with HR and legal flanking her. Before I could even sit down, they slid a document across the table. Non-disclosure agreement, my boss said curtly. Sign it. The paper detailed how I wouldn't discuss agency operations, wouldn't imply negligence, wouldn't suggest anyone could have prevented this tragedy. I stared at the words swimming on the page. I tried to tell you something was wrong, I said quietly. You mentioned she was housing homeless individuals, my boss corrected. corrected. That's not illegal. That's not even against policy. There was no actionable intelligence. Legal nodded along, already building their defense. My phone rang before I could respond. Megan's mother. I excused myself despite my boss's glare and answered in the hallway. The woman's voice was hollow, broken. She told me about Megan's brother, how he'd frozen to death while homeless 10 years ago. Megan had been 17, had found him herself. She couldn't save him either, her mother whispered. I thought she'd worked through it in therapy. I thought she was better. When I returned to the conference room, the NDA was still waiting. Human Resources had added sticky notes marking where to sign. I picked up the pen, then set it down. I need time to think about this. My boss's face darkened. Time isn't a luxury we have. The media is already spinning this into an agency failure. We need unified messaging. I left without signing. In the lobby, the HR director intercepted me with seemingly casual questions. How often had I visited Megan's house? Had I documented these visits? Did I bring her anything? You brought her soup? She asked when I mentioned it, her pen hovering over her notepad. How many times? Do you have receipts? The realization hit me like ice water. They weren't just protecting the agency. They were building a case that would shift liability onto me. The emergency contact who should have known. The colleague who enabled. The mandated reporter who failed to report. I made it to the parking lot before the first reporter found me. She appeared from behind a van, microphone already extended. Did you help her hide the bodies? Our sources say you visited the house multiple times. I fumbled with my car keys, trying not to run, trying not to look guilty. But what did innocent even look like anymore? This is crushing to witness. The way grief broke Megan so completely that she tried to resurrect the very person whose death shattered her world. The horror of finding Bill's name on her lips while looking at a stranger's corpse makes my heart ache. The questions followed me as I dove into my car. How long did you know? Why didn't you report it? Do you feel responsible for those 5 deaths? I peeled out of the parking lot, my hands shaking on the wheel, the reporter still shouting questions at my taillights. I drove to my sister's house on instinct, needing somewhere safe, somewhere the media couldn't find me. But as I turned onto her street, my heart sank. A news van was already parked outside, its satellite dish extended like an accusation. Through the window, I could see my sister's curtains drawn tight. She'd seen them too. I kept driving, circling the block, trying to think. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from unknown numbers. Reporters, probably. Or maybe more people who'd seen the news and decided I needed to hear their anger. I turned it off, but the silence felt worse somehow. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked hollow, haunted, like Megan had looked in those final weeks. The light turned green, but I couldn't move. Cars honked behind me. A driver shouted something angry, but all I could think about was Megan's face when they'd taken the bodies away. The pure betrayal in her eyes. The way she'd screamed that they were finally safe, finally loved, finally home. The car behind me laid on the horn, jolting me back to reality. I pressed the accelerator and drove aimlessly through the city, my mind fracturing between past and present. Every street corner held a homeless person who might not be breathing. I found myself slowing at each one, studying their chests for movement, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The grocery store parking lot seemed safe enough. I needed food, normalcy, something to anchor me to the living world. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt too bright, exposing me. I grabbed a basket and tried to focus on mundane tasks. Bread, milk, eggs, simple things that living people needed. In the produce section, I noticed an elderly man slumped against the banana display. His stillness sent ice through my veins. I abandoned my basket and rushed over, my hands shaking as I reached for his shoulder. He jerked awake at my touch, eyes wide with alarm. Other shoppers stared as I backed away, mumbling apologies. The man gathered his groceries and hurried off, glancing back at me with fear. The pharmacy was my next stop. My anxiety medication had run out days ago, and the tremors in my hands were getting worse. The pharmacist looked up as I approached, recognition flickering across her face. She glanced at the prescription, then back at me, her expression hardening. She typed something into her computer, frowning at the screen. She leaned forward, lowering her voice as she explained there was an issue with my insurance. But I saw the way her coworkers whispered behind the counter, saw the local news playing on the waiting area TV with my face in the corner of the screen. She suggested I try another pharmacy, her tone making it clear I wasn't welcome back. Outside, I sat in my car, hands trembling too badly to insert the key. The weight of public judgment pressed down on me. I was the woman who knew, the one who brought soup to a house of corpses, the one who failed to act. The park across the street drew my attention. A figure lay motionless on a bench covered in newspapers. My rational mind knew they were probably just sleeping, but my body moved without permission. I crossed the street, my breathing shallow, and approached the bench. The person hadn't moved. I reached out, my hand hovering over the newspapers. A jogger stopped beside me, asking if everything was okay. I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. The jogger pulled out their phone, and I heard them describing me to someone, probably 9/11. I backed away, but not before I saw the homeless person stir, disturbed by the commotion. 2 police officers found me by my car. They were polite but firm, asking for identification, asking if I was feeling all right. One of them recognized my name, exchanging a meaningful look with his partner. They suggested I go home, get some rest. They'd be keeping an eye on the area, they said. The implication was clear. I was now someone to be watched. The community center hosted a support group for first responders dealing with trauma. I'd found the listing online, desperate for anyone who might understand. The circle of chairs felt both too close and too far apart. A paramedic was speaking when I entered, describing a call that had gone bad. The group leader nodded for me to take a seat. The paramedic continued his story, and my blood ran cold. He was talking about Megan's house, about moving bodies that had been repositioned daily, dressed and cleaned like dolls, about the smell that no amount of eucalyptus could mask, about finding evidence that the bodies had been fed, their mouths pried open, soup dribbling down gray skin. The room spun. I gripped my chair as he described finding my soup containers in the kitchen, labeled with names of the deceased. The group leader noticed my distress and called for a break. In the bathroom, I dry heaved over the sink, my reflection a stranger in the mirror. The therapist's office was supposed to be a safe space, but even there, the images wouldn't fade. She specialized in PTSD, came highly recommended. I sat on her couch trying to describe the weight of hindsight, the guilt of missing signs. She took notes, occasionally asking gentle questions, but I could see it in her eyes too. The question everyone had. How did I not know? Therapy helped with the nightmares somewhat, but it couldn't erase the knowledge that I'd sat in that house, brought food, made small talk while death surrounded me. It couldn't change the fact that 5 families had lost their chance to say goodbye because I'd failed to act on my instincts. The call from Megan's public defender came while I was attempting to eat dinner. My food went cold as I listened to him explain that Megan had been deemed competent to stand trial. She understood the charges, could assist in her defense. He wanted me as a witness, to testify about her mental state in the weeks before, to help build a case for diminished capacity. The next morning, I sat in his office, surrounded by case files and legal books. He showed me photos from the house, asking me to identify when I'd last seen each victim alive. Except they weren't victims in the traditional sense. They'd all died naturally, on the streets, before Megan found them. She'd taken their bodies from alleys and parks, from places where they'd died alone and unmourned. The prosecutor's office was a different atmosphere entirely. She saw the case differently. Megan had stolen bodies, prevented proper burial, desecrated remains. The families deserved justice. She pressed me about the agency's failures, about my boss's dismissive response. She wanted me to testify about systemic negligence that had allowed this to happen. I sat in my kitchen that night, caught between two narratives. Was Megan a mentally ill woman who'd broken under grief, or was she a criminal who'd violated the dignity of the dead? Both felt true. Neither felt complete. The storage unit held old agency files I'd copied over the years, a habit born from watching too many coworkers get thrown under the bus. I searched through boxes by flashlight, my hands dusty from old papers. There they were. 3 reports I'd filed about Megan, concerns about her emotional state, requests for intervention, all marked as reviewed by my boss, all filed away with no action taken. I photographed every page, creating a digital trail that couldn't be destroyed. The timestamps proved my boss had seen these reports weeks before the discovery. The evidence was damning, but using it would destroy what remained of the agency, would leave hundreds of homeless without services. The local news had obtained the story through official channels. I watched from my apartment as they detailed the agency's pattern of negligence. My reports were on screen, names redacted but timeline clear. My boss appeared briefly, flanked by lawyers, offering no comment. The agency board members behind her looked grim. The envelope slipped under my door that night contained a single photo. My apartment building, taken from across the street. A red X marked my window. No note was needed. The message was clear. Some people blamed me for the agency's downfall, for the services lost. Megan's mother found me at a coffee shop I'd started frequenting, away from my usual haunts. She looked like she'd aged a decade in weeks. Her hands shook as she gripped her cup, telling me about Megan's childhood, about finding her teenage son frozen in an alley, about Megan's promise to save everyone she could. She begged me to testify for the defense, to help the jury understand that Megan was sick, not evil. Her daughter had been trying to rewrite history, to save her brother again and again through strangers. It was illness, not malice. I held her hand as she cried, feeling the weight of her grief. The families of the deceased had their own pain. I encountered them at the courthouse, where I'd gone to review public records. They confronted me on the steps, their anger raw and justified. Their loved ones had been stolen, denied proper burial, turned into props in someone's delusion. One woman showed me photos of her father, dignified in life, reduced to a doll in death. They demanded I testify for the prosecution, to ensure Megan faced consequences. They spoke of closure denied, of the horror of learning their family members had been dead for weeks while they searched. Their pain was real, their anger justified. My boss called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. HR was there, along with security. The termination was swift, violation of confidentiality policies. The NDA I'd never signed didn't matter. They'd found other reasons. Security escorted me out, my personal items in a box. Reading about the pharmacist turning her away makes me wonder how fast news travels in communities. Did they all see the broadcast at the same time? Coworkers averted their eyes as I passed. The local news ran conflicting narratives about me. Some painted me as a whistleblower who'd exposed corruption. Others suggested I'd enabled Megan, ignored obvious signs. They'd found my old social media posts about compassion fatigue, about the difficulty of the work. Everything could be twisted to fit a narrative. My partner tried to be supportive, but the stress was destroying us. They couldn't sleep beside me anymore, not with my nightmares, my 3 a.m. panics. The smell of eucalyptus from their bath products made me vomit. They started staying with friends, then family. The conversation about separating was gentle but final. The efficiency apartment was all I could afford without a job. It was small, sparse, but mine. Until I discovered the homeless camp behind the building. The first time I tried to bring them blankets, they recognized me. Word had spread through the community. I was the one who'd failed Megan, who'd let the system collapse. They wanted nothing from me. My attempts to help were met with suspicion and hostility. One man spat at my feet, telling me to stay away. They knew who I was, what I represented. The helper who couldn't help, the one who'd made everything worse. The letter from Megan arrived on a Tuesday. Her handwriting was shaky but legible. She forgave me, she wrote. Forgave me for stopping her from caring for her guests. They were waiting for her, she explained. Waiting in heaven where it was warm. She'd included drawings, disturbing sketches of angels with the faces of the dead. I visited Bill's actual grave, needing to see where he truly rested. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. Fresh flowers lay on his simple marker. The groundskeeper told me a woman had been visiting daily before her arrest. Always brought flowers, always spent exactly an hour. He showed me other graves, all homeless individuals, all showing signs of Megan's attention. The pattern was clear. She'd been visiting the dead for months, leaving flowers, talking to headstones. Then something had shifted. The visiting wasn't enough. She needed them closer, needed to care for them properly. The line between grief and madness had dissolved completely. The bar was dimly lit, filled with people who didn't watch the news. I nursed a single drink, trying to process everything. Megan had been grieving in increasingly destructive ways, and I'd watched it happen. We'd all watched it happen. The system designed to help had failed everyone involved. The DA's office called with an offer. Testify about the agency's failures. Help them build a case for systemic reform. In exchange, they'd recommend leniency in any civil suits. It was pragmatic, calculated. Justice reduced to bargaining chips and legal strategy. I sat in my apartment as rain began to fall, the sound drumming against windows. The city was preparing for another cold snap. Somewhere, homeless individuals were seeking shelter. Somewhere, social workers were filling out forms, trying to help. And somewhere, Megan sat in a psychiatric facility, still believing she'd saved them all. The weight of choosing between narratives pressed down on me. Protect a mentally ill friend or seek justice for systemic failures? Every choice felt like a betrayal of someone. The truth was messier than any single story could contain. My phone rang. Unknown number. Probably another reporter or angry citizen. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message. It was the medical examiner, his voice clinical and precise. He'd finished the full autopsies. All 5 individuals had died of natural causes, exposure, and illness. miraculous, taking them weeks before Megan found them. She hadn't called anyone. She'd collected the already dead. This changed everything and nothing. The horror remained. The family's pain remained. But now there was confirmation of what I'd suspected. Megan hadn't murdered anyone. She'd done something arguably worse. She'd stolen death itself, refused to let the dead rest. The trial would start soon. I would have to choose which truth to tell, which narrative to support. But first, I had to survive the weight of public judgment, the loss of career and relationship, the knowledge that 5 families suffered because I'd failed to act on my instincts. Outside my window, the city moved on. Life continued. But for those of us touched by Megan's madness, nothing would ever be simple again. Every homeless person was a potential tragedy. Every act of compassion carried the seed of delusion. Every system meant to help could fail in ways we'd never imagined. The story was far from over. The trial loomed. The truth waited to be told. And somewhere in a psychiatric facility, Megan still believed she'd saved them all, given them the love and warmth they'd been denied in life. The horror of her compassion would haunt us all forever. The settlement meeting took place in a cramped law office downtown. 3 families had filed civil suits against me, seeking damages for emotional distress and improper handling of their loved ones' remains. My lawyer, a tired-looking woman who'd taken my case pro bono, laid out the terms: community service at homeless shelters, mandatory training on recognizing mental health crises, and a modest financial payment I'd be making monthly for the next 5 years. I signed without hesitation. The alternative was a trial I couldn't afford and publicity that would destroy what little privacy I had left. The families sat across from me, their grief palpable. One woman clutched a photo of her father, the same one she'd shown me at the courthouse. Her hands trembled as she watched me sign. When I looked up, meeting her eyes, she gave the slightest nod. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. We were all victims of Megan's broken mind. My first day at the shelter arrived too quickly. The building sat on the edge of downtown, a converted warehouse that smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. I stood outside for 20 minutes, my hands shaking, before forcing myself through the doors. The intake coordinator barely glanced at my paperwork before pointing me toward the dormitory. The moment I stepped inside, panic seized me. Rows of beds filled with sleeping figures, some so still I had to watch for the rise and fall of blankets. My vision blurred, my breathing went shallow. I backed into the wall, sliding down until I sat on the cold linoleum, knees pulled to my chest. The shelter director found me there. Bob was a massive man with gentle eyes who'd worked these streets for 30 years. He'd known Bill personally, had been at his memorial. He sat beside me on the floor, not speaking, just present. When my breathing finally steadied, he helped me to my feet and led me to his office. He showed me photos on the wall, homeless individuals who'd died over the years, each one remembered. Bill's photo was there, recent flowers tucked behind the frame. Bob explained that he'd heard about Megan, about what she'd done. He understood my fear, but he needed workers who could push through it. The homeless couldn't afford our trauma. He started me on kitchen duty, away from the dormitories. I spent my shifts preparing meals, washing dishes, keeping busy. Gradually, he introduced me to residents during mealtimes, living, breathing people with stories and needs. Some recognized me from the news. A few turned away, but others, desperate for any help, accepted my presence. Weeks passed in this routine. I learned to check on sleeping residents without panic, to see them as people rather than potential corpses. The nightmares continued, but they lost some of their sharp edges. I was doing something, however small, to help. The letter from Megan's facility arrived on a Thursday. Her handwriting was clearer now, the medication working. She wrote about understanding reality, about the crushing weight of what she'd done. She'd culled them with kindness, she wrote. The cold had culled them first, but she'd stolen their dignity, their peace. The lucidity brought deeper pain than her delusions ever had. I visited her the following week. The psychiatric facility was clean, sterile, nothing like the warm chaos of her home. She sat across from me in the visiting room, heavily medicated but present. We didn't speak much. What was there to say? But when I stood to leave, she grabbed my hand. Her grip was weak but desperate. I squeezed back, and we stayed like that until the guard said time was up. The agency closure happened quietly. One day the building was full of activity, the next it stood empty. 200 homeless individuals lost access to services overnight. I saw some of them at the shelter, confused and angry. They recognized me, knew I'd been part of the system that failed them. One man cornered me in the kitchen, demanding answers I didn't have. But Victoria, an elderly woman who'd been on the streets for years, defended me. She'd seen me working, seen me trying. That mattered more than past failures. Her words carried weight with the others. Slowly, tentatively, they began to accept my presence. My former boss made the news again when prosecutors charged her with obstruction of justice. Security footage showed her feeding documents into the shredder the night after Megan's arrest. The perp walk was brief but devastating. She'd spent decades building her career, only to watch it crumble in minutes. I felt no satisfaction watching it, just emptiness. The city council held emergency hearings on homeless services. I received a subpoena to testify, my stomach dropping as I read it. But when I took the stand, I spoke only about specific failures at our agency. I didn't speculate, didn't assign blame beyond what I'd personally witnessed. The council members seemed disappointed, wanting more drama, more scandal, but I gave them only facts. 3 other agencies came forward in the following weeks, admitting they'd ignored similar warning signs about their workers. The problem was systemic, born from underfunding, understaffing, and compassion fatigue. The city promised reforms, though everyone knew promises meant little without funding. I found myself pulled into community meetings, reluctant advocate for changes I wasn't sure how to implement. People wanted easy answers, clear protocols that would prevent another Megan. But mental illness didn't follow protocols. Grief didn't respect boundaries. All we could do was watch for signs and act when we saw them. Winter arrived with brutal efficiency. The first freeze sent everyone scrambling for space in shelters. I worked overnight shifts now, doing rounds every hour. Checking on residents had become routine, my panic replaced by methodical care. I knew their names, their stories, their preferred sleeping spots. They were people, not potential tragedies. One night, I found a new arrival in Bill's old corner. The man was elderly, frail, coughing badly. I brought him extra blankets, helped him to the medical station. He survived the night and the next and the next. Small victories in an endless war against cold and circumstance. Megan sent artwork from the facility, abstract pieces in dark colors, shadows and shapes that hurt to look at. She was processing her trauma through art therapy, the accompanying note explained. I hung one piece in my apartment, a reminder of how grief could twist into something monstrous. The memorial service for the 5 individuals happened in spring. The families had organized it, wanting to reclaim their loved one's dignity. I attended, sitting in the back, trying to be seemingly invisible. But when they read the names, showing photos of each person in life, I found myself crying. They'd been people with histories, families, dreams. Megan had stolen their deaths, but we'd all failed them in life. After the service, one family member approached me, the woman whose father's photo she'd carried. She didn't speak, just handed me a small card. It was a prayer card from her father's proper funeral, his face peaceful and dignified. A gift or a reminder, I wasn't sure, but I kept it. The overnight shifts became my rhythm. I knew every sound the shelter made, every resident's sleeping patterns. When someone didn't show up for their usual bed, I'd check the hospitals, the police stations. Sometimes I found them, sometimes I didn't. Each loss hit hard, but I kept working. 1 year after Megan's arrest, I stood in front of a training room full of social workers. The city had mandated training on recognizing burnout and psychosis in caregivers. They'd asked me to share my story, to make it real for these exhausted, overworked people. I spoke simply, without drama, about missing signs, about systems that prioritized paperwork over people, about how grief could break even the strongest minds. I showed them Megan's reports, the ones I'd filed, the ones ignored. I talked about the smell of eucalyptus and death, about bodies positioned like sleeping children. The room was silent when I finished. These workers saw themselves in my story, in Megan's story. They understood how thin the line was between helping and harming, between compassion and delusion. After the presentation, several approached me privately, sharing their own concerns about colleagues, about themselves. The shelter work continued. Winter gave way to spring, to summer, to another winter. I marked time by faces rather than seasons. Some residents moved on to housing, to jobs, to better lives. Others disappeared into the streets or death. Bill's photo remained on the memorial wall, fresh flowers appearing weekly. The tag always read M, though I knew Megan couldn't be leaving them. I'd rebuilt something resembling a life, not the one I'd had before, but something functional. The nightmares had faded to occasional bad dreams. The smell of eucalyptus still made me nauseous, but I could walk past homeless individuals without checking if they were breathing. Progress measured in small victories. The final letter from Megan came 2 years after her arrest. She'd been transferred to a long-term care facility, would likely spend the rest of her life in treatment. She wrote about accepting what she'd done, about living with the weight of it. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted me to know she understood. I kept working at the shelter, overnight shifts where I could do the most good. Each round, each bed check, each person helped was a small redemption. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to keep moving forward. The city's homeless services had improved marginally, though never enough. The memorial wall grew longer each winter. On cold nights, I thought about Megan, about Bill, about the 5 who'd been stolen from death, about systems that failed and people who broke and the thin line between helping and harming. But mostly, I focused on the living. The ones who needed blankets, food, a bed for the night, the ones who could still be saved. The story became a cautionary tale in social work circles. Not sensationalized, just truth. A reminder that compassion without boundaries could become dangerous, that grief unprocessed could twist into something monstrous, that sometimes the best intentions led to the worst outcomes. I never forgot the weight of those bodies being removed from Megan's house. Never forgot her screams, her reaching hands, her absolute belief she was saving them, but I'd learned to carry it, to use it. Every night at the shelter, every person checked on, every small act of bounded, rational help was proof that tragedy could teach without destroying. The work continued, it always would. And somewhere in a facility, Megan continued too, living with the weight of love turned monstrous. We'd both learned in different ways that saving everyone was impossible. All we could do was try to save who we could, within the bounds of reality, without losing ourselves in the process. Thanks for reading this story with me. I hope you have a wonderful day. I will see you in the next one.